Season 1 of Mad Men begins in the year 1960 and introduces Don Draper, a genius and infamous young creative director working for the small ad agency Sterling Cooper. Sterling Cooper's two owners are Bert Cooper, the old and wise founder of the company, and Roger Sterling, a product of nepotism who inherited his partner position from his father, and who lacks drive but can charm anyone. Don is idolized by his fellow co-workers, including a group of young creative and accounts employees, including Pete Campbell, Ken Cosgrove, Paul Kinsey, Harry Crane, and Salvatore Romano. These younger men are all misogynistic and selfish, viewing the office's pool of secretaries as their hunting ground. Secretly, Sal is gay and only pretends to be a womanizer to fit in with his colleagues and avoid prejudicial treatment. Ken is the most well-adjusted of the group, and despite being an account executive, he proves himself to be very talented as a freelance writer, getting one of his short stories published in The Atlantic, earning the jealous ire of copywriter Paul Kinsey. Harry Crane views himself as the most morally strong member of the group, but still succumbs to the group's debauchery and cheats on his pregnant wife with Pete's secretary. And Pete Campbell himself is a wannabe social climber with huge ambitions and an impatience to achieve them. Despite being a genuinely great ad executive toward his clients, his obvious machinations in the office earns him the ire of Don Draper. The men of the office quickly set their sights on Don's new secretary, Peggy Olson. Ultimately, it's Pete who wins Peggy's heart, and the two share a night together, despite Pete getting married to a woman named Trudy. Peggy has ambitions to be a copywriter, which is a job predominantly held by men. Peggy is dissuaded from following her passions by office manager Joan Holloway, who is resigned to her status as head of secretaries and the object of every man's desire. Secretly, Joan is having an affair with Roger Sterling. Despite having cheated on his wife Mona with multiple different women, Roger views Joan differently, as he is genuinely infatuated and in love with her. As Peggy dedicates herself to her work, she soon impresses the older copywriter Freddie Rumson, who tasks her with helping him write copy for products directed toward women. Don also becomes impressed by Peggy's work and takes her under his wing as his de facto protege and promotes her to copywriter. As Peggy achieves her career dreams, she also begins to gain weight due to the job's newfound stress. Eventually, Peggy discovers her weight gain is actually due to her being pregnant with Pete's baby, which she keeps a secret and puts up for adoption. Despite Don judging the crassness of his younger counterparts, he is no less morally dubious. At home in the suburbs, he has a wife Betty and two young children, Sally and Bobby. But while working in the city, Don has a longtime mistress, a beatnik artist named Midge, and begins falling in love with his newest client, department store owner Rachel Menken. Betty's upbringing has made her privileged but extremely body-conscious and attention-seeking. This leads to Betty encouraging the young neighbor boy Glenn's obsession with her. When Betty seeks the help of a psychiatrist to treat a psychosomatic numbness in her hands, Don begins secretly paying the doctor to relay notes from Betty's confidential therapy sessions. At work, Don's status as creative superstar is emboldened by his popularity amongst the execs of Lucky Strike cigarettes. Tensions in Sterling Cooper are high due to rising health concerns of cigarettes and the fact that Lucky Strike makes up a majority of the agency's income. Another blow to Sterling Cooper's morale is their agency's free support of the Richard Nixon presidential campaign, only for JFK to win the presidency, proving the aging execs Roger Sterling and Bert Cooper are further behind the times than they thought. The stress of the business and his constant debaucherous behavior leads Roger Sterling to have two separate heart attacks, leading to Lucky Strike execs pressuring Cooper to prove stability in the agency by naming Don Draper an official partner. Don accepts his new title and pay raise, but refuses to sign an exclusivity contract. Don Draper's persona as an alluring and mysterious enigma is threatened when his long-lost brother Adam finds him in New York City. Don is resistant to reuniting with his brother, as he is a reminder of his past and his real name of Dick Whitman. Dick grew up the bastard son of a poor, abusive, alcoholic father and a prostitute who died in childbirth. After his father's death, Dick was raised by his stepmother, who hated him for being a reminder of his father's infidelity. They were eventually forced to live in a brothel alongside a group of prostitutes, one of which took Dick's virginity and began his twisted view of relationships and sex. When Dick finally turned 18 and was able to leave home, he enlisted in the army and served in the Korean War alongside Lieutenant Donald Draper. When Dick accidentally set off an explosion that killed the real Draper, he switched their dog tags and stole the identity of Donald Draper, allowing his younger brother Adam to believe he died and starting a new life with a clean slate. Dick became genuine friends with the real Don Don's widow, Anna Draper, the only person who fully knows the real him, and has financially supported her life in California ever since. Now fearing Adam's return will spur up the past, Don sends his brother away with some money and demands they never see each other again. The heartbroken Adam succumbs to his depression, sending Don a package containing all of the old childhood photos that were the only keepsakes Adam had to remember his older brother by. Unfortunately, that package is mistakenly delivered to Pete Campbell, who tries to use the revelation of Don's real identity as an army deserter to blackmail him into giving him a promotion as the new head of accounts. At first, Don fears his life will crumble around him and tries to convince Rachel to run away with him to start a new life. But Rachel turns the frantic Don down and breaks up with him. When Pete brings the revelation to Bert, the head of Sterling Cooper dismisses the news as irrelevant and grants Don the ability to fire Pete if he desires. Instead, Don spares Pete's job in an attempt to assert his power over Pete and earn his unending devotion. Don then fills the head of accounts position with Duck Phillips, a talented figure who is newly sober and putting back together the pieces of his life following his alcoholism leading to him being fired from his last job and losing his family. As the season comes to a close, Don's success at work is contrasted with his home life. He finally learns of Adam's death and feels guilty abandoning him once again. Don's marriage to Betty becomes strained when he pushes back against spending time with her family, and she discovers that he has been secretly paying her psychiatrist to share her confidential session notes. In the end, Don is left alone on Thanksgiving, left to reckon with everything he's ever done. I want to cut in real quick and tell you about this video sponsor, Warby Parker. The only reason I can even see the movies and TV shows I cover on this channel is because of my eyeglasses, and thanks to Warby Parker, I can also look cool while doing it. Right now I'm wearing their Lupe glasses, and I love these things. I've got a pretty big head, so it's great that Warby Parker makes all of their frames in-house and with so many different options that they can really suit any face. I've also got their Waller sunglasses, and these things are just as cool. They have so many different styles to choose from that are modern and trendy or timeless and classic, allowing you to look like you'd fit right in with the cast of Mad Men in the 1960s. Just as trendy as the look of these glasses is how easy it was to order them. Warby Parker has a really intuitive virtual try-on feature so you can browse and shop all of their frame options, which includes both eyeglasses and sunglasses from the comfort of your home. But if you prefer to do your shopping in person, Warby Parker also has over 250 retail locations in the US and Canada, where you can get styled by one of their expert advisors. And if you need a new eyeglass prescription, well, Warby Parker has you covered there too. They offer eye exams, prescription glasses, and contacts all in one place. Eye exams start at just $85 and their eyewear starts at $95. And that's including prescription lenses with anti-reflective scratch-resistant coating. So Warby Parker glasses are stylish, expertly crafted with premium materials, super convenient to buy, extremely affordable, and there's even free shipping and a 30-day money-back guarantee. So what are you waiting for? Head on over to warbyparker.com or use their mobile app to try their virtual try-on tool and browse their amazing collection of glasses. And right now you can actually save 15% when you purchase 2 or more prescription pairs of glasses or sunglasses. This deal is available both online and in stores, so don't miss out. Thanks to Warby Parker for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to the recap. In Season 2 of Mad Men, Doug Phillips schemes to be named partner at Sterling Cooper and convinces the agency to abandon their small airline client Mohawk for a chance at pitching themselves to the much larger and more lucrative American Airlines. This infuriates Don, who feels they are being disloyal to a customer with no guarantee of their gambit working. When Sterling Cooper fails to land American Airlines, Doug feels ashamed and realizes his position within the agency is in jeopardy, leading him to slip back into his alcoholism. Meanwhile, Peggy is dealing with her emotions from putting her baby up for adoption and the shame she feels from her religious family. The only other person aware of Peggy's secret is Don, and he's the only one who helps her cope with her decision. Peggy chooses to throw herself back into her work and continues to prove herself as an expert copywriter. When her biggest supporter, Freddie Rumson, is fired for his embarrassing alcoholism, Peggy is given a promotion to replace him. This eventually leads to Pete confessing that he still loves her and regrets marrying Trudy, while Peggy finally reveals that she has given birth to his child but put it up for adoption. Don begins taking on new accounts and is forced to deal with the obnoxious comedian and spokesman Jimmy Barrett. Secretly, Don begins an affair with Jimmy's wife, which the comedian reveals to Betty out of spite, leading to Don being kicked out of his family home. Don takes this opportunity to run away to California, where he is allowed to be his true self in the comfort of Anna Draper, leaving his family and his co-workers completely in the dark of his whereabouts. Elsewhere at Sterling Cooper, Paul Kinsey continues to grow more pretentious and faux-enlightened, caring more about being seen as a progressive intellectual than actually being one. Harry Crane reconciles with his wife after his affair, and she encourages him to assert himself more at work, leading him to found Sterling Cooper's television department. Sal Romano develops a crush on Ken Cosgrove and encourages his passion for writing, despite Ken being straight and Sal having recently married a woman named Kitty to hide his own sexuality. Joan begins feeling pressured by her own internalized misogyny and standards to find a husband before she becomes a spinster, leading her to get engaged to an aspiring surgeon named Greg. Unfortunately, Greg idolizes his potential career despite not being particularly skilled. Greg's career insecurities manifest in him taking advantage of Joan's submissiveness, eventually leading him to assaulting her in Don's office, and a broken Joan still agreeing to go through with their wedding. Roger finds himself adrift after Joan becomes engaged to another man, and soon begins an affair with the new young secretary, Jane. Seeing the freedom Don has now that he's separated from Betty, Roger has a full-on midlife crisis and divorces his wife Mona to marry Jane, despite his new lover being barely older than his own daughter, Margaret. With a new bride and a pricey divorce settlement, Roger falls under immense financial pressure. With Don still away, Duck schemes to better his position within Sterling Cooper. He uses his knowledge of the agency's financial troubles to pitch his former company, Putnam, Powell & Lowe, to buy Sterling Cooper and name him the new acting president. The reluctant and struggling Roger convinces Cooper to accept PPL's offer, not realizing Duck's machinations to take control of the company for himself. Duck secretly informs Pete of his schemes and offers him a place at his side in the new company structure. Anna eventually convinces Don to return home and reconcile with his family. Back in New York, Pete proves his loyalty to Don by informing him of Duck's plot to take over Sterling Cooper. At a meeting to finalize the agency merger, Don announces his refusal to work under Duck as president. When Duck exclaims that Don is contractually obligated to, Don reveals that he never signed a contract. This enrages Duck, embarrassing him in front of the PPL execs, who decide to officially merge with Sterling Cooper, but keep its current leadership structure in place, while ousting Duck altogether. As Dawn returns home in the hopes of reconciling with Betty and their family, she reveals that she is pregnant with another child, prompting them to reunite on very uncertain grounds. In Season 3 of Mad Men, PPL sends their Yes Man executive Lane Pryce to make sure Sterling Cooper is being properly run. The neurotic and buttoned-up financial officer is a fish out of water in the bustling city, which his wife hates, and she pressures him to find a way to return their family to London as soon as possible. But Lane is completely subservient to PPL, who have no respect for his well-being and constantly shuffle him to different international offices to get them running efficiently before sending him off to the next one. Elsewhere, Don befriends the extremely wealthy and influential Conrad Hilton, founder of the Hilton Hotels. Don hopes to woo Connie's business to Sterling Cooper and does many pro bono ideations for Connie and his company. Connie quickly takes advantage of his power over Don and demands to be waited on at his every whim, even forcing Don to finally sign a contract with Sterling Cooper to prove the agency's stability and viability to potentially handle the Hilton Hotel's account. At the new Sterling Cooper, Pete and Ken are both offered the job of head of accounts, pitting them against each other to drive competition between the two and produce better results. Pete becomes obsessed with beating Ken, while Ken is just happy to be getting a promotion. Duck takes this opportunity to try to woo both Pete and Peggy to his newest agency, Gray. Although they both decline, realizing that Duck is in a career spiral, Peggy does begin a sexual relationship with him. Despite turning down Duck's offer, Pete does begin to contemplate leaving Sterling Cooper when he learns that Ken is officially being named the senior vice president of accounts over him. After Joan turns in her resignation to Sterling Cooper to become a housewife, her husband Greg informs her that he failed to receive a pivotal promotion, and his supervisors have made it clear that he has no hope for a surgical career in New York City, and so he tells Joan that she will need to continue to work. But Joan is prideful and embarrassed by Greg's career status, and she chooses to still leave Sterling Cooper with everyone thinking she's off to live a perfect idealized lifestyle, without first consulting his wife, Greg announces his new career as an army surgeon, shipping off to war to pursue his dream career at any cost, including his own wife's happiness. When Lucky Strike cigarette exec Lee Garner Jr. makes a sexual pass at Sal, but Sal refuses, Lee goes to Roger to have Sal fired. Knowing how important Lucky Strike is as a client to Sterling Cooper's financial stability, Roger fires Sal, leaving the innocent and talented art director unfairly unemployed. Outside the office, Betty's father Gene comes to stay with the Draper family, much to Don's chagrin. Despite being heavily pregnant, Betty meets and begins an emotional affair with Henry Francis, a kind and supportive political advisor to the governor of New York. Sally develops a strong bond with her grandfather, and she is devastated when he dies. In honor of her father, Betty names her and Don's newborn son Gene. As Betty continues her emotional affair with Henry, Don begins a more physical one with Sally's teacher Suzanne. Realizing Don is keeping secrets from her, Betty breaks into Don's secret office desk and discovers his true identity as Dick Whitman. Don explains to Betty his entire past, for the first time being truly vulnerable with his wife. When Betty becomes emotionally distraught over the news that President JFK has been assassinated, Don fails to properly comfort her, leading Betty to acknowledge she no longer loves him and wants a divorce. And so, Betty leaves Don to be with Henry. As the season comes to a close, Don learns from Connie that Sterling Cooper will not be getting Hilton Hotel's business, as they are instead being represented by the much larger agency McCann Erickson. Connie does, however, tip Don off to the fact that McCann intends to buy PPL, and by extension, Sterling Cooper. Don takes this revelation to Roger and Bert, pitching them a plan to buy Sterling Cooper back for themselves. Unfortunately, Lane's business prowess has grown the agency's value to too high a price for them to afford. Instead, the partners of Sterling Cooper devise a scheme for Lane to fire them all, nullifying their non-compete clauses and allowing them to create a new company from scratch. They ask Lane to officially join them as a full partner, which Lane happily accepts due to his first experience with proper respect and loyalty and the opportunity to plant roots. Before PPL learns of their scheme, the new partners must race to secure all of their biggest clients before the McCann buyout goes through. To aid in their efforts, the new partners of Sterling Cooper, Draper, Pryce recruit Joan, offering her a position and promotion befitting her skills, Pete Campbell giving him the respect he craves and naming him a junior partner, and Harry Crane, who just so happens to be in the right place at the right time. The final piece of the new agency puzzle is Peggy Olson, who is tired of her work being overshadowed by Don's, and always bearing the brunt of his creative frustrations. Don ultimately convinces Peggy to join the new agency, professing his admiration for her work and promising her the respect and credit that she deserves. In Season 4 of Mad Men, the newly founded Sterling Cooper Draper Pryce positioned themselves publicly as a scrappy underdog, but in the office they realize the precariousness of their company finances. Don's status as a popular and mysterious enigma backfires after a public interview makes him appear disastrously inscrutable. Personally, Don is hitting rock bottom, with his relationship with his ex-wife Betty growing increasingly fraught, and she constantly impedes his ability to spend time with his children. Feeling completely adrift with his business and personal life, Don falls into heavy alcoholism that finally catches up with him and begins impacting his creative work. At the new SCDP, Pete continues to prove himself as an excellent accounts man, bringing in many new businesses to help keep the agency afloat. At home, he welcomes a daughter with his wife Trudy and tries his best to be a reformed ideal husband and father. Pete also recruits his former frenemy Ken Cosgrove to join SCDP and bring along his loyal clients. After the dissolution of the original Sterling Cooper, Ken moved to rival McCann Erickson, and then moved again to the smaller agency Geyer after hating McCann's toxic work culture. The newly engaged Ken is more than happy to work under Pete, realizing his personal moral boundaries would conflict with a more cutthroat authoritative position. One of those boundaries is not mixing business with family, as he refuses to help SCDP land the extremely valuable Dow Chemical as a client, where his future father-in-law is an exec. Meanwhile, Harry Crane has turned the media department into one of SCDP's most valuable and consistent assets. Harry's success has turned him more egotistical and slimy, now openly cheating on his wife and shamelessly preying on any woman that crosses his path. Lane Pryce's family returned to London after feeling homesick and failing to acclimate to the American lifestyle. Don helps pull Lane out of his lonely depression, spurring Lane to start a relationship with a Playboy bunny. Soon, Lane's overbearing and abusive father comes to New York and tries to convince him to return to his family in London by force. partners, but Lane refuses. Eventually, Lane's family returned to his side in New York, giving the city another chance, though by now, Lane has a lust for independence. Despite Dawn's promise of a fresh start with her due recognition, Peggy finds herself in an even worse position at SCDP. Dawn demands too much from her, ruining her personal life, and never gives her her proper credit, including shunning her from recognition for an award-winning campaign she helped him conceive. Peggy also develops a prickly relationship with SCDP's new art director Stan Rizzo. Stan is abrasive and misogynistic, but when Peggy stands up to him and puts him in his place, she earns Stan's respect and he develops romantic feelings for her. Joan becomes one of the most valuable members of the team as she keeps the business afloat amidst their financial troubles, eventually earning her a promotion to Director of Agency Operations. With Joan's husband Greg deployed in Vietnam and Roger's marriage with his young wife Jane falling apart, the two former lovers have a one-night stand that results in Joan becoming pregnant. Roger agrees to support Joan no matter what, and she decides to permanently end things with Roger and tell Greg that the baby is his. Almost as bad as Roger's heartbreak over Joan is his failure to keep Lucky Strike as a client, who have decided to move on to a new creative team. This client loss threatens to bankrupt SCDP, forcing them to lay off much of their staff and leaving everyone else to scramble to secure new clients to keep the business afloat. All of the partners, including the much less wealthy Pete and Lane, put in their own personal money to help keep the business running in the meantime. This also leads to Roger contemplating his usefulness to the company and begin to doubt his business skills, now that his only real client is gone and Pete has usurped him as the most valuable accounts man. Without consulting the other partners, Don decides to publish an op-ed in the New York Times, taking control of the narrative of losing Lucky Strike by declaring that SCDP is against the harmful health effects of cigarettes and vowing to never work with big tobacco ever again. This piece sends shockwaves through the ad agency community, infuriating tobacco companies, angering the desperate and betrayed partners of SCDP, but earning the respect from some powerful potential business allies. Trying to find solace in his one happy place, Don flies out to California to spend time with Anna, only to learn from her niece Stephanie that she is dying of cancer. When Don returns home and learns of Anna's death, he has an emotional breakdown in front of Peggy, who comforts her mentor, hoping the two reconcile their friendship and creative partnership. Don then resolves to clean himself up, cutting back on his drinking and rededicating himself to his work. He also begins dating SCDP's new market research consultant, the psychiatrist Dr. Faye Miller, the most mature and stable woman he's ever been with, who may actually begin to impart some positive influence on his life. When Pete brings in a new client, North American Aviation, the FBI needs to do background checks on everyone involved with the account. Don becomes paranoid that his past will be exposed and he forces Pete to drop the client. When Don reveals his past and his anxieties to Faye, she encourages him to come clean to everyone and live in the truth. Don refuses to take this advice and begins pulling away from their relationship. Elsewhere, Sally begins acting out after Betty and Henry's marriage. When Sally grows closer to their neighbor Glenn, Betty forbids their friendship and fires their longtime nanny Carla for allowing the children to innocently hang out. Wanting to take his children on a vacation to California, but no longer having a nanny to help look after them, Don is forced to pay his new young secretary Megan to accompany them on their trip. Megan proves herself great with Don's children, and the opposite of Betty's vain and selfish personality. After taking his children to see the home that belonged to the late Anna Draper, Stephanie gives Don her wedding ring as a gift. Feeling connected to his Californian sanctuary, Don convinces himself that he loves Megan and impulsively proposes to her with Anna's ring. As the season comes to a close, Don and Betty clear out their old family home, departing with finality and the first sign of mutual affection in a very long time, with Betty moving with Henry and the children to a new home in the suburbs, and Don moving to an apartment in the city with his new fiancée Megan. In season 5 of Mad Men, Don is still in the honeymoon phase with his new bride Megan. As the ad man throws himself into his new marriage, he becomes distracted at work, leaving him as little more than a phantom in the office and forcing Peggy to pick up the slack in his absence. Don also promotes Megan to copywriter, and despite Peggy at first wanting to hold a grudge against her new fellow writer for having the job unfairly handed to her, Peggy grows fond of Megan and sees genuine potential in her. Megan begins feeling her own frustrations at work, as Don constantly finally whisks her out of the office and away from her writing to meet his own romantic needs. Don also pressures Menken into babysitting his children at his whim, despite Menken having her own plans and social life. Further straining the new marriage is the age difference between the couple, as Don is more set in his ways while Menken is young and free-spirited. Despite finding a knack for copywriting, Menken still has a passion for her original dream job of acting, eventually convincing Don to allow her to quit SCDP to pursue acting full-time. With Menken now away from the office and therefore spending less time with Don, he begins to fall into his old patterns of drinking and his wandering eye returns. Betty becomes resentful of Don's seemingly newfound happiness and bitter toward the young and beautiful Menken. Betty begins struggling with her weight, shattering her self-image and driving her to be even more critical of Sally. This leads to Sally spending more time with Don and Menken, and in turn, Betty tries to drop a bomb on Sally about Don's relationship with the late Anna Draper. But this only further pushes Sally away from Betty, as Don is able to open up to Sally a little more about details of his real identity and past. As Betty feels defeated, Sally reaches puberty and realizes that she is in need of motherly advice, giving Betty the opportunity to finally show up for her daughter and offer genuine and caring support. Elsewhere at SCDP, new copywriter Michael Ginsberg is hired to work alongside Peggy. Ginsberg is extremely eccentric and terrible at reading social cues, yet prodigious at copywriting. This soon earns the contempt of both Peggy and Don, who compete with Ginsberg over pitching the best ad campaigns. Off his game for the first time in his career, Don begins actively sabotaging Ginsberg's work to help prop up his own ideas in front of clients. Peggy meanwhile learns that Ginsberg's eccentricities are a coping mechanism due to his tragic upbringing of being born in a Nazi concentration camp where his mother died. Peggy grows closer to both Ginsberg and Stan, but eventually realizes that she will never be able to make a name for herself at SCDP working under Don, and so she finally quits the agency to work for the rival firm Cutler, Gleason & Chaw. As Peggy departs, Don finally realizes how important she was to him and wishes her the best. Looking to prove his usefulness to the company and best his new rival Pete Campbell, Roger Sterling begins paying Ginsberg in secret to help him come up with ideas to pitch potential new clients. This season of uncertainty and change in Roger's life leads to him experimenting with LSD, which changes his perspective on life and leads him to accepting that his marriage to Jane needs to end. Unbeknownst to Don and Menken, Roger also begins a secret affair with Megan's visiting mother, Marie. Pete Campbell now has a picture-perfect life with his wife and daughter in the suburbs, but misses the excitement of living in the city. He starts to grow more detached from his work and more passive-aggressive toward his colleagues, which not only leads to a fist fight with Lane, but also a petty drive to ruin the eternally optimistic Ken's happiness. Pete alerts Roger that Ken is still writing fiction on the side, and Roger forces Ken to stop his passions and focus on his work. Despite this, Ken continues writing under a new pen name. When Don and Roger land Dow Chemicals as a client, Ken agrees to help work with his father-in-law, but on the spiteful condition that Pete can never be involved. Pete begins an affair with a married woman in his neighborhood, but that affair comes to an end when the woman's adulterous husband forces her to use electroshock therapy to treat her depression, leaving her with no memory of Pete or their affair. Seeing her husband struggle, Trudy allows Pete to rent an apartment in the city for late work nights, creating an unspoken arrangement for Pete's philandering ways. Joan is struggling to raise her son Kevin while Greg is deployed in Vietnam. Joan feels betrayed upon discovering that Greg has volunteered for another tour, willingly abandoning his family to further pursue his career. This is the final straw for Joan, who stands up for herself and cuts Greg out of her and Kevin's lives for good. As SCDP gets close to landing the highly coveted Jaguar automobiles as a client, Pete learns that the only way to secure the deal is by having Joan sleep with one of the company's execs. Don is furious that the other partners would even consider such an arrangement, but he is outvoted. Joan is taken aback by being asked to perform such an act, but Lane convinces her to negotiate an ownership percentage in the agency in exchange for her services. And so Joan goes through with it, earning a percentage of SCDP and landing Jaguar for the agency, but also driving a rift between the partners due to the varying lengths they've all proven to go for money. Elsewhere within SCDP, to avoid public scrutiny, the agency becomes an equal opportunity employer by hiring a lone black employee, Don Chambers, who becomes Don Draper's newest secretary. Don is subjected to a lot of racism and prejudice within the workplace, but she proves herself to be a skilled and dedicated worker, earning her boss's respect. After his copywriting career fizzled out after not being hired by SCDP, a washed up and desperate Paul Kinsey returned to ask his old colleague Harry Crane to help him begin a career as a television writer. After sleeping with Paul's new girlfriend, Harry feels sorry for his old friend, and so, even after discovering that Paul is a terrible writer, a guilty Harry gives him enough money to travel to California and give a career in television a shot. Lane Pryce is struggling financially, never recovering from the money he was forced to give SCDP to help see it through its financial rough patch. He now finds himself in a great amount of debt, owing substantial taxes that he keeps a secret from everyone. Lane tries multiple schemes to come up with the money to pay his debts, but when all of them fail, he resorts to stealing money from the company. When Don discovers this, he confronts Lane and tells him that he needs to confess to his crimes and resign from SCDP. Instead of facing public humiliation and returning to London as a disgrace to his family, Lane is found dead in his office by his shocked and devastated colleagues. Don is the only one to know the truth about Lane's financial problems and his stealing from the company, and is reminded of Adam's death, feeling guilty for both. In season 6 of Mad Men, SCDP is now thriving, and many of the partners, including Roger, Pete, and Joan, see the massive financial potential of launching an IPO. Unfortunately, on the eve of going public, Don loses his temper and fires Jaguar as a client, due to his contempt for their treatment of Joan. This infuriates Joan, who now feels like her coerced sex act was all for nothing. At the same time, Pete embarrassingly runs into Trudy's father Tom at a brothel. Wanting to spare himself the embarrassment of interacting with his son-in-law, Tom pulls his business Vic Chemicals as a client of SCDP, further ruining their IPO potential. Outside of the office, Don begins a torrid affair with a woman named Sylvia, despite her and her husband Arnold being close friends and neighbors with Don and Megan. As Megan gets an acting job on a soap opera and her career begins taking off, her marriage with Don grows more strained, leading to him becoming obsessed with Sylvia and starting to act more dominantly in their secret relationship. When Trudy catches Pete having an affair with a neighbor, she kicks him out of their family home. Meanwhile, Harry grows resentful and openly antagonistic toward Joan for being made a partner while he wasn't, despite the massive success of his television department. Elsewhere, Peggy thrives at her new position at Cutler, Gleason & Chaw. She still keeps up with her old friend Stan, and they share with each other gossip from their respective offices. Peggy is taken under the wing of her boss, Ted Chaw, who gives her all of the respect and admiration she once craved from Don. Ted is so impressed with her that he falls in love with her, despite being married with kids. With Peggy's help, CGC wins many clients over SCDP, creating a contentious rivalry between Ted and Don. Roger Sterling is now resolved and emboldened to prove himself at work, finally dedicating himself to his job and securing SCDP a pitch meeting with General Motors for their new top-secret Chevy project. On the eve of SCDP's pitch, Don runs into his business rival Ted Chaw, where the two discover that they aren't so different, sharing similar passions and outlooks on the advertising industry. Realizing General Motors is going to hire neither of their companies due to being too small, Don and Ted create a last-minute scheme to merge their companies and prove their worth as power players. The partners of SCDP and CGC agree to the merge, and the newly formed agency successfully wins the Chevy account. And so, Peggy finds herself reluctantly working with Don Draper once again. In the newly merged SCDP and CGC, now known as Sterling Cooper and Partners, the varying work styles of the partners proves initially difficult. Don is constantly out of the office for personal matters, including his increasingly more domineering relationship with Sylvia, disappointing Ted, who was previously mystified by him. Meanwhile, Peggy is disappointed that her mentor and secret lover Ted seems to be corrupted by Don, as the two engage in irresponsible drinking benders, which Ted is unaccustomed to, leaving him hungover at work. Ken is placed in charge of the Chevy account and is forced to constantly be at their Detroit offices and manage their oversized personalities. While on a hunting trip with Chevy execs, Ken is accidentally shot in the face, leading him to return to New York and give up the account, after which Pete takes charge. Joan tries to prove her usefulness as a partner to the newly merged agency and begins bringing in her own accounts to manage. A new hire at the agency is Bob Benson, who seemingly comes out of nowhere and inserts himself into everyone's work lives. Bob draws the jealous ire of Pete for his brazen and open schemes being so successful. Even the usually unflappable Ken doesn't understand how this mysterious Bob has shown up and so expertly ingratiated himself into the company. Bob does become genuine friends with Joan and develops a fondness for her her son Kevin, drawing the jealousy of Roger. Bob is seen as a potential asset for Ted's partner Jim Cutler, who schemes to have the CGC half of the newly merged agency take full control and oust the partners of Sterling Cooper, Draper, Pryce. Jim assigns Bob to work the Chevy account with Pete, a massive show of respect to earn Bob's loyalty. Eventually, the reluctant Pete takes Bob's advice for a live-in nurse named Manolo to care for his mother. When Manolo begins making sexual advances toward his mother, Pete confronts Bob, who makes sexual advances of his own toward Pete, which are staunchly rejected. In response, Pete seeks out the assistance of Duck Phillips, who is now a corporate headhunter, to find a new position for Bob at a different company. Duck discovers that Bob Benson is a fraud, but instead of trying to expose Bob, as he attempted to do to Don years prior, Pete instead uses this information to keep Bob submissive and loyal. Following this, Pete learns that his mother has seemingly been killed by Manolo after the two got secretly married on a cruise. Pete's resentment toward Bob grows, and Bob is forced to scheme his way out of Pete's wrath. While working the Chevy accounts, Bob embarrasses Pete in front of the execs, getting Pete removed from the account, leaving it fully under Bob's control. Meanwhile, Sylvia grows more guilty over her and Don's affair and breaks up with him. Don has trouble accepting this and refuses to let her go. While trying to get his life back together, Don has an encounter with Betty that turns sexual, though both repress their tryst and return to their respective spouses. When Sylvia's son becomes eligible for the military draft, Don uses his connections to keep the boy safe from combat. An elated Sylvia thanks Don, leading to the two having sex before being unfortunately caught by Sally. This breaks the two up once again and fractures Don's relationship with his daughter. Reaching a new low, Don begins to grow bitter and resentful toward his former rival and new partner Ted, living a seemingly peaceful and good life. After seeing the married Ted on a date with Peggy, Don warns him that Peggy is clouding his judgment and affecting his work. As the season comes to a close, SC&P lands Sunkist as a new client, and will need to open a small office in Los Angeles to help service their demands. His marriage fully over, Pete agrees to move to LA to run the Sunkist account as the account exec. Ted Shaw asks to move to LA with his family to run creative, hoping to get a fresh start away from his love for Peggy. Unfortunately, Don is also seeking a fresh start, asking Megan to quit her soap opera job and come with him to LA to try out her acting career there. Megan agrees and quits her job, but on the eve of their move, Don has a breakdown in front of prospective client Hershey Chocolate, revealing his traumatic childhood growing up in a brothel, leading him to relenting and allowing Ted to take on the Sunkist account and move to California with his family. Peggy is distraught by Ted leaving, while Megan is furious over quitting her acting job for nothing. Don assures her that she can still move to LA to follow her acting dreams, and their marriage can work long distance. For his recent string of erratic behavior, Don is placed on an indefinite leave of absence by the other partners of SC&P. With his wife across the country and his career in limbo, Don finally attempts to reconcile with his past, bringing his children to see the brothel he grew up in. In season 7 of Mad Men, Don still hasn't told Megan that he is indefinitely suspended from his job, lying to her about being busy with work during the week and only visiting her on sporadic weekends in California. When Megan discovers Don's lie and that he has the ability to be with her permanently but chooses not to, she is devastated. Megan tries her best to rekindle her passion with Don and reconcile their marriage, but they have grown too far apart, leading to them officially deciding to get a divorce. Meanwhile, Don is keeping his creative juices flowing by helping his old friend Freddie Rumsen pitch freelance ad copy. As Don awaits his invitation to return to SC&P, he is unaware that Jim Cutler never intends to allow him to return, hiring a man named Lou Avery to fill his position. Jim has swayed Joan and Bert to his side, with both tired of Don's antics putting their careers and livelihoods in jeopardy. Only Roger remains loyal to Don, arranging for him to return to work but under strict conditions, forcing him to work under Lou Avery and no longer drink in the office, or else his contract will be terminated and he will lose his stake in the company. At first, Don bristles at his new rules and falls back into his pattern of drinking and slacking off, but Freddie gives him a pep talk from his own destructive past, encouraging Don to sober up and prove that he can still be the legendary Don Draper. Elsewhere within the office, Peggy hates the condescending Lou, who lacks the creative vision and passion of Don and Ted. Joan is beginning to thrive in her new role handling her own accounts, leading her to promoting Don Chambers from secretary to head of personnel. Pete is thriving in California, while Ted's new beginning isn't as easy as he'd hoped, driving him to be consumed by his work. Bob Benson learns that Chevy will soon fire SC&P, but he is offered a lucrative job at Buick. Bob takes this information to Joan and proposes they get married, helping him bolster his image as a family man and helping to financially support Joan and her son Kevin. Joan appreciates Bob's offer but rejects him, still hoping to one day marry for love. Meanwhile, Roger's daughter Margaret abandons her husband and young son to live in a commune. Roger realizes his own mistakes as a father have not only passed down to his daughter, but are now affecting his grandson, and so he resolves to do better by Kevin and become a better man. Despite Don's new resolve, Jim Cutler still schemes to oust him as part of his larger goal to take full control of the agency. As part of his plans to bring the company into the future, Jim installs a massive IBM computer in the office's creative lounge and tries to win Harry's loyalty by promising him a partner position. The eccentric and paranoid Ginsburg is driven mad by the computer, prompting him to cut off his own nipple. Peggy is horrified and dismayed by her friend and colleague's actions, forcing her to call the police and have Ginsburg institutionalized. When Don realizes nothing he can do will secure him his job back and that Jim Cutler is staging a company coup, he convinces Roger, Bert, Joan, and Pete to support him in a scheme of their own. Roger proves his leadership skills and secures a deal with the massive ad agency McCann Erickson to buy a controlling stake in SC&P and have him run it as an independent subsidiary. Everyone agrees to 5-year contracts with McCann in exchange for massive payouts, even a reluctant Jim and the depressed Ted, who perks up at the idea of moving back to New York and just being creative again and not having to worry about the stresses of running a business. Unfortunately for Harry Crane, he barely misses out on officially becoming a partner and securing his own financial windfall. This deal is tied to the celebration of the USA finally landing a man on the moon. Content with his company and in awe of the moon landing, Bert Cooper dies peacefully in his sleep. 1 year later, the partners of SC&P find themselves in the year 1970. Don is living a bachelor lifestyle, selling his apartment he once shared with Megan, leaving him completely adrift. Meanwhile, Joan begins a relationship with a wealthy retiree named Richard. He wants to give Joan the fairy tale life she deserves, but is reluctant over the idea of helping to raise Kevin, as his children are all grown and he now wants to live without responsibilities. Despite being promised independence, McCann shuts down SC&P and absorbs its staff. Roger is forced to fire Ken, as McCann still holds a grudge for him leaving their company years ago. Ken is hired to fill his retiring father-in-law's position at Dow, and he promises to use his new position to spitefully make Pete's life hell as a client. Roger is left feeling like he squandered the company his father and Bert Cooper worked so hard to build. Joan isn't taken seriously and is harassed by her co-workers, though she is left with no way to react to the abuse without potentially breaking her contract and losing her payout. But as Joan becomes defeated and disillusioned, she agrees to a smaller than deserved payout to leave the company for good. And then there's Don Draper, who leaves New York without notice, not just unsure of his future at McCann, but of his entire career in advertising. Despite being one of the few SC&P partners to thrive at McCann, Duck Phillips tries to convince Pete to take a job working for Learjet in Kansas. The promise of his contract being fully bought out and the opportunity of a fresh start prove alluring to Pete, who reconciles with Trudy and accepts the new position. Meanwhile, Roger marries his secret lover, Megan's mother Marie, and he assures Joan that he is leaving a large portion of his estate to their son Kevin. Ken seeks out Joan's help with her extensive contacts to help him produce work for Dow Chemicals, which in turn inspires Joan to start her own production company. Richard then breaks up with Joan, fearing her career ambitions will impact his desire for freedom and spontaneity. Joan asks Peggy to join her as an equal partner, but Peggy chooses to stay at McCann, as does Ted, who reclaims his passion for advertising now that he is free of managerial responsibilities. At McCann, Stan professes his long-harbored love for Peggy, and she realizes that somewhere along their friendship, she fell in love with him too, leading to the two embracing. Elsewhere, Betty discovers that she has terminal lung cancer. Instead of undergoing invasive chemotherapy that would destroy her body and negligibly extend her life, she decides to forego medical help and die on her own terms, with her beauty intact. This completely devastates her family, including Don, but Betty stands firm in her decision, which includes having her brother take care of her children, instead of leaving them with the bereft Don or Henry. As the series comes to a close, Don arrives in California. Uncertain of his career future and distraught over Betty's impending death, Don fails to find his usual solace now that Anna has died and her home has been sold. Stephanie invites Don to a wellness retreat that only further pushes him into a depression, leading him to break down on the phone with Peggy, who becomes fearful of her boss's mental state and begs him to return to New York. But as Don fully gives himself over to the retreat and has an emotional breakthrough of her feeling unloved and unimportant, he finally finds true inner peace. And as he partakes in a group meditation, the re-inspired Don envisions Buy the World a Coke, his magnum opus ad campaign that in real life is one of the most influential and acclaimed advertisements of all time.